I hope everyone enjoyed the talk so far. I'm really humbled and privileged to be here today. And I'd really like to thank Joanna for inviting me and putting all this together. So maybe a hand of applause for her today. And what I get most excited and passionate about is being able to restore wetlands. And if you're a UCI student, a PhD student or a graduate student, when you come to get recruited here for them to come to tell you to spend 5 years studying school again for another year, they bring you to the Back Bay Science Center. And has anyone been to the Back Bay Science Center? Quite a few people. And there's this like amazing windy road, and sometimes cars fall out into there, and you know, it's a dangerous place. But this is our, the Upper Newport Bay Ecological Reserve, and I'm going to talk to you today about this. And what is it? It's Southern California's largest estuary. And the estuary is really where the fresh water of our mountains and our hillsides meets the ocean. So I'll talk to you about that today. And so there's three main parts of my talk today. And first I want to talk to you a little bit about wetlands, and specifically what a salt marsh is. And a salt marsh is this very special habitat that doesn't really care about rain or like droughts because it has the tides. And over time it evolved to be this type of plant called the haliophyte. So if you could throw salt water in it, this plant loves it. So if you water your tomatoes at home with the ocean, probably not a good idea. Probably going to die pretty soon. But in the corner here we have the plant that we've been talking about. So we're talking about plants and how they sequester carbon. So this is one of the plants that literally lives off the coast of the ocean right here in the Upper Newport Bay, right in our backyard. And it's a really heavy plant. So if you picked it up, you could really hit someone with it, or, you know, it's really heavy. So when you think about carbon sequestration, I just think of this saltwort plant. And before coming to UCI, I had no idea what a salt marsh was. So I've been working with NBC since June of last year, and so I'm going to talk to you about what our carbon sink is in our backyard, and then how it's threatened by sea level rise, and then the strategies that we can to protect it. So first, I want to take your attention to this part in the middle, and the red areas are more carbon sequestration. So the redder it is, the more of a hotspot it is, and then around like the orange kind of yellowish area is not as much. And one of the reasons why this area, in particular D, this watershed is very rich in carbon sequestration has to do with the Mississippi Delta. And if you think of the Mississippi Delta, I think of mud and just really boggy, can't even see the water. But really, that's really an important part of the ecosystem. And on the Mississippi River, which is the largest river in North America, there's a series of 29 dams that keep the river from flood control and protect us. But those dams also block the sediment and block the natural process to bring all the sediment down. And as also you know, the Louisiana area there is also our biggest headquarters for oil production. So we're really at odds with our carbon sinks and our carbon sources. So, but if you take our attention to San Francisco up here, this whole area, the peninsula and the South Bay, everywhere used to be a salt marsh. So a lot of the native people through coastal California, this was the gateway into the California, the San Joaquin Delta, or excuse me, the huge delta force. So if you were a native person many years ago, you would have used the salt marshes as a place to get things for basketry, hunting. It would have been in a very important, rich area, also with a lot of food sources. But what's very important about all of our habitat as a country, all of our wetlands from the redwood forest all the way to Maine, across the coast, they can sequester up to 500 metric tons of carbon per year. And this is a study conducted in Nature, and it came out last year. So we're barely finding out that these wetlands aren't just a source of habitat, but they're also an important sink and a place we can deposit all of our emissions, and we can put them in these salt marshes. But there's also a few things that are important, and they also protect us from storm surges. So if you live next to a coastal salt marsh and there's a storm surge like a hurricane or a tsunami, that salt marsh will better protect you because it can take a lot of the force from the ocean and distribute it across the salt marsh. And the salt marsh could be buried. You can bury it and then come back in a year, and those plants are really, they thrive in that kind of habitat. And they also filter runoff. So every time you see a creek, or you live by the Santa Ana River watershed, or you live in the San Gabriel River watershed, or the LA River watershed, all these salt marshes at the end of our coast really filter off the water before they hit the ocean. So they also do another service as far as cleaning our urban runoff, and they also provide habitat for rare and endangered species. And has anyone checked out the birds in the Back Bay? Yeah, and there's like hundreds of people with NFL-type zoom lenses, you know, like something you would shoot the Super Bowl with. So we live next to a world-renowned bird area, and I've even seen the sign. Says that we're internationally recognized, so that's also really great. But if you look at California, no other state in the United States has suffered most loss. You can see here in the red, we've lost over 90% of our wetlands. So San Francisco estuary, for example, used to be a huge, huge salt marsh, but now most of it was made into a salt dike and for salt production. So we lost a lot of those estuaries. So that's why when you look at what 10% we have left, we would even have been storing more carbon if we would have preserved a lot of our wetlands. You see New Hampshire has like a few wetlands, so they're doing pretty good. But if you look at the salt production site up here, this is the 1950s, right here in the upper Newport Bay, which is familiar. And as a whole, Southern California have lost between 75 and 85% of their salt marshes. And this is what it looks like. So you strip all the vegetation, you get all of the saltwort and all of the plants that live there, the bird species and everything. And then you make these ponds for the salt water to evaporate. And that's what really causes the habitat destruction. And once you tear up topography that's been there for thousands of years, you can't just put it back the way it is and bring in bobcats, and you can't just go into a muddy. Has anyone fallen in the mud there? You can't even drive a truck in there, you know. So coming back to put this area back is really difficult. So it's better not to do it from the beginning. But since we have all this destruction, and we have such an important carbon source, it's important for us to figure this out. So again, we mentioned earlier, Frank and Franny Robinson, they were able to get the salt marsh protected. And much of the area was going to be developed, as we mentioned earlier, into like a private marina, so they would have gotten rid of everything, and there would have been private boats. And UCI students like myself would never have been a company to be able to come to UCI. We would have just saw a yacht club. So I'm really happy, and I'm really proud to work with the Newport Bay Conservancy, because this is the origin. It's just grassroots efforts, ordinary people just getting involved and saying that, you know, we need to protect our salt marsh. And I don't think they were necessarily thinking about carbon sequestration back then. They were thinking about the ridge-raised whale, which I've seen, and it does exist, it's out there, and it's an endangered species that lives in the salt marsh. But they really worked hard to protect it, and in 1975 it was fully protected, and now we're able to enjoy that as a public today. And now the salt marsh is back, and it is recovering, and is actively sequestering carbon. But there are some threats in the future that can threaten our ability to continue that. So if you look at this infographic in 2020 right now, we're doing pretty good. These are the salt marsh as it expands. But around 2060, the salt marsh doesn't have any more room. So by the end of the century, we could totally lose our salt marsh. And the reason why that's bad is not only because we lose all of our protection for our Newport Beach community and our Costa Mesa communities, we lose all that protection, we also lose the endangered species, and we also lose the carbon. Because if the plants can't be there right above the ocean, they can't live anymore. So if they're totally inundated all the time, those plants like the saltwort, like I mentioned, will just suffocate and die, and they'll just float off into the ocean to become a carbon source. So keeping that salt marsh is very important. And what that does to our native bird populations is pretty traumatic. So if you can look, this is our current state of time. So if you were to fly over the upper Newport Bay, you see a mix of different type of habitats. So the lighter green is lower marsh habitat, the middle green is like the middle, and then there's upper. So there's like 3 tiers. It's like, think of it as like a habitat stairway, and then each bird has its own territory. Like we like the lower steps, I like the middle steps, and then some people like the high steps. And then so you can see we have a diversity of birds, pickleweed, we have different grasses, different habitats. But once we start getting more sea level rise and more of those ice caps melt, we start to have just middle marsh. And then we lose our diversity of birds. And I think we're okay with that because we still have a lot of the grass and the habitat. But if we look into it's even hard to say. It's 2,110, so I think they should have just picked it at 2,100, but that's on me. That's in the paper. And this paper is in Science and was led by USGS. But if you look at in the 2,100 scenario, we'll just have mudflat. And when you just have mudflat, you don't have the plants actively storing carbon for us. And you also lose the ability of those plants to protect from coastal erosion. So it's a very important paper here, and I think we'll be looking at it for centuries. And this paper here looked at all the salt marshes from Tijuana all the way to Vancouver, and they particularly chose ours because we have the most topography that's threatened the most by sea level rise. So scientists around the world are really looking at the upper Newport Bay. So you should feel excited that you're here today because you're really getting information on how to solve the problem on the front lines. And so if we look at if we do get salt water intrusion and we lose our salt marshes, what can we do? And this paper also came out in the Journal of Nature. And if we do nothing, we stand to lose 20 to 50% of all salt marshes nationwide. But if we do something, we can adapt and we can save, and we can actually increase our wetlands by 60%. So the two options that we have to help our wetlands is to restore sediment flows. So a lot of the times I mentioned that there's dams and everything, and has everyone seen the Santa Ana River? And it's like channelized, and it doesn't really look like a river, or if you've like seen the LA River, it's just channeled, and if you've been to Big Bear Lake, that's a dam itself. So we've been trapping all this sediment for years, and all that sediment really needs to reach the ocean to make a difference. And we also need to find new habitat for wetlands. But fortunately, even though the real estate's really hard around here to find a place to live, let alone a habitat, we are in luck because the Banning Ranch Conservancy, they just received a $50 million donation from another couple, and this area right here will be impacted by sea level rise and is currently open space, so they're fighting to keep it as open space. And this is the Santa Ana River that goes all the way up to San Bernardino, and this is one of the areas that you can start converting that area now into a salt marsh, so by the end of the century, we'll have that habitat there. And another exciting opportunity to find new habitat for salt marsh in the future is the San Joaquin Marsh, and which is one of my favorite places as a UCI student. For Dr. Peter Bowler's limnology class, a lot of the TAs for UCI, we do all of our classes there, and we give thousands of students tours of the freshwater marsh, and they see egret for the first time. Many of UCI students have never been into a arboretum or any kind of natural place. So I think it's really exciting in the future if we can, if I get permission from the San Joaquin Marsh, we can make that into a salt marsh in the future, and we could also show what future sea level rise will look like. And also too, we also have a King Tides program that's coming up, showing the highest tide of the year, so you could also look on our website for that. But those are two locations in the future that will be impacted by higher seas, and this is with 4 feet of sea level rise and by the end of the century. So we have time, but we just should start now. And so here's a better look at the Banning Ranch Conservancy. And this used to be like an oil production field, and I would be really happy the day it gets preserved, and then I can start working there and putting the salt marsh expanded. But what's really important is you're not only sequestering carbon for the area, but you're also protecting the communities from sea level rise and storm surges. So it's also a win-win for everybody. So you protect your homes, you provide endangered habitat, and you also sequester carbon. And if you look at the UCI area here, here's the upper Newport Bay. And so a lot of this area, you can start converting it and putting a salt marsh once the seas start to rise, which I will be in my elderly years, but I'll still be there. And then so adapting, just a quick word on adapting everything and bringing the sediment. So here's some sediment trapped by the Anaheim Stadium, and that sediment should be flowing down the river, but because of the channelization and dams and things, we've altered our watershed. That's something we need to figure out. And I think this, I like this problem because it encompasses engineers, and it really cuts to the core of the Ridge to Reef program, working with JPL scientists from everything. It encompasses everything, so that's something I'm very excited about. And the last takeaways I have is the salt marsh really needs you. And I really implore you to get involved with an organization. And my research at UCI has been so much more beneficial because I work with the Newport Bay Conservancy. And at my involvement there, I'm able to do a research committee. So I talk with other scientists, and we have really long discussions about science, and maybe we talk too much. But I definitely implore you to get involved with the local group and really have what you learn in class. Try to find an organization that has the same questions to you so that you can really connect. And talk about the climate emergency every day, and whether you want to talk about maybe we should eat Nutella, or maybe you should volunteer in the salt marsh. Just pick your issue and really be passionate about it. I think that's the number one thing, is to bring your PPE, which is passion, persistence, and enthusiasm. And then also continue your education and learn as much as you can on YouTube, and also visit our Climate Solutions Hub. And if you want to get on the salt marsh with me on Wednesday mornings and on the first Saturdays, you can visit the Newport Bay Stewardship, and I'm listed on there, and you can come visit the salt marsh. And I'd like to thank the Tree Seeder Lab at UCI who encourages all of my work to work with the community, and the OC Biotech Education program, which I get a lot of research help, and the Newport Bay Conservancy, of course, and Dr. Allison and the Ridge to Reef. So thank you so much for coming.